Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today we are here to do a JJK Chapter 259 review, which this chapter is known as The Decisive Battle in the Uninhabited Demon-Infested Shinjuku Part 31. As we all know, Gege has the best and perfect naming titles, but that's kind of the end of the happiness because this is a very, very sad chapter. If you already read it, you know. As our chapter starts out with a flashback back to when Choso was trying to teach Yuji about convergence, where it's revealed to us that Yuji was going to do the soul swap training with Yuta Akotsu as well as Kusakabe, meaning he was going to get simple domain mastery from Kusakabe as well as Yuta Akotsu's reverse curse technique, and that he would have to do blood manipulation training the hard way like I and a lot of people had speculated. And then Choso ends up explaining it pretty badly, as he says convergence is kinda like this and then like that and a little while doing these types of arm movements. That's mainly because of the fact that we find out later on that Choso does blood manipulation instinctively. So because he understands blood manipulation instinctively, he's not able to explain the basics to Yuji. However, we then get Kamo Noritoshi actually explaining the basics on how to use blood manipulation as well as convergence to him. As then Kamo says, think of bathing in hot water. You can feel the heat encompassing your entire body. In that same way, you can expand your blood vessels, creating a vague outline of your body. That's the basic foundation of blood manipulation. As Yuji then gives an example of relating it to peeing yourself, while at the same time Choso says, oh, whatever works. You can pretty easily tell that Choso was kind of jealous at the fact that Kamo was actually able to explain it while he cannot. As then right after, Kamo continues to explain how to practice convergence pretty easily, which is basically by practicing squishing something and applying pressure to something, often using cans or clay, and because those work pretty well, as well as sponge and paper. As Yuji then says more so as a joke, Choso, this is what it means to teach someone, and Choso is trying to beg Yuji to ask him about Supernova. However, Kamo basically tells him that for now, blood manipulation doesn't need to be a potent weapon for Yuji, and understanding the basics would be best. As you can see Choso pouting, because he is very, very sad about the fact he can't teach his little brother at all. And I gotta say, I feel really, really bad for Choso in this moment, because, like, this is kind of the flaw of being an instinctive type of person and being able to learn things near instinctively. It's very hard for you to explain things to people who actually care about you and you care about, because those are the people you want to teach, and it just ends up with emotional pain like that because you feel like you're unable to do anything about it. However, it's then after we swap over to the narrator, as the narrator begins to explain how Furnace Open works. As they say, Ryomen Sukuna can only open the furnace doors after preparing his ingredients, cleave and dismantle. Outside of his domain, Furnace cannot be used on multiple targets. This binding vow enabled Sukuna to not only reduce all within the Malevolent Shrine's range to dust, but ensure that all the resulting particles were matted in the explosive curse energy akin to Furnace. Despite their absurd firepower, the flames within the furnace lack both speed and range. To amend this, Sukuna undertook another binding vow. On top of this, Sukuna deftly altered the functionality of the domain to one that only allowed entry to living beings, maintaining the shrine's output while sealing it airtight. Thermobaric explosives and the transformed particle matter danced, raining down on every inch of the domain. The heat of furnace spread the detonation immediately, birthing, scalding, instantly compressing and decompressing shockwaves, ensuring the death of all living beings within the domain. An attack capable of instantly obliterating Mahoraga back in Shibuya. This is Ryomen Sukuna's ultimate move. As we get Urame stating that this is our victory, while Hikari looks into the distance to see the massive explosion of fire that's caused by Sukuna, while Yuji has a look of fear, before we head back to the narrator. As the narrator says, on top of constantly altering the necessary conditions for his barrier techniques, the repeated use of binding vows to alter his effective range meant that during his battle with Gojo Satoru, the furnace remained cooled, as Sukuna didn't have the freedom to unseal its flames. Alright, so for those of you who don't have a degree in Yapology, I'm going to take a moment to pause and explain basically everything that I just read from the narrator. Number 1, and this is probably the most important thing of them all, this confirms that the Fire Arrow is by far and away Sukuna's most powerful and ultimate attack, because the narrator just straight up says this is Sukuna's ultimate attack. So if Sukuna does end up showing anything else in his curse technique that we don't know about, it will be weaker than the Fire Arrow. 2, which is the Fire Arrow itself is very, very slow outside of the domain, which more than likely explains why Sukuna had never once used the Fire Arrow outside of the domain other than against Jogo, because they clashed attacks back then. And now we're going to go over basically all of the binding vows that are involved with the creation of Furnace. Number 1, the only way that you can utilize Furnace is after using Cleave and Dismantle in order to prepare his ingredients, as the narrator themselves says. They also say that outside of his domain, Furnace cannot be used on multiple targets, which more than likely amplifies Furnace even further inside of the domain in comparison to outside of the domain. Furthermore, this also allows the heat to spread all throughout the domain, basically having the domain itself act like an oven for everything inside of it to cook, mainly because all of the air is contained within it. Now finally, the main reason why he could not use it against Gojo is because repeatedly during the domain clashes, he ended up changing the range of his domain and how far it could actually go. As a result of that, he ended up changing how far the effective range of the domain was, and as a result of that as well, he wasn't able to use Furnace effectively because of how big or small the domain had to be and its continuous changing ranges. However, that's about everything as we now get back into the chapter itself, as we get Yuji realizing something as everything begins to go dark around him, but that darkness is blood, as he calls over to Choso with Choso calling back to him, and Yuji is confused, asking what Choso is doing. As Choso then apologizes to Yuji, apologizes to his younger brother that he was really useless in training because everything came so instinctively to him, with Yuji saying instinctively, huh? You really hit the nail on the head, while Choso's face went away and he was using all of the blood left inside of his body and all of the blood his cursed energy could muster in order to create this shield for Yuji Itadori. Before it's then, we see Yuji and Choso re-enter into the soul realm we've seen them enter into so long ago, where Choso's other brothers were present with Yuji when Yuji and Choso had found out they were siblings. As Choso said, "Yuji, you got a grasp on reverse curse technique much faster than I did." With Yuji then responding, "Not thanks to me, Sukuna just happened to use it a lot in my body." With Choso responding, "Don't be so modest, it's only natural for a little brother to surpass his big brother." With Yuji saying in return, "That isn't any reason for you to leave." As Choso says, "Well, I need to apologize to Sukumo too. Yuji, I'm sorry. I'm leaving you on your own, again. You were there for me when I needed someone the most. That's more than enough." As we get Eso and Kechizu calling out to Choso once again, with them saying, "Are you there, big brother?" As Choso says, "I'm here." And they say, "I'm so cold, big bro." "It's okay. Let's talk. As long as we're talking, we can forget about the cold. Our 150 years were all but a few days to Yuji. Thank you, Yuji. Thank you for being my little brother." As Yuji says in return, "Thank you, big brother." As the remains of Choso's blood and everything that was a sign of Choso other than Yuji Itadori himself begins to burn away, Yuji being the only proof now that Choso had ever lived. As Yuji says, is anyone, before we head back to the narrator while Sukuna approaches Yuji inside of the smoke. As the narrator says, Itadori Yuji always told himself he was nothing but a cog in a machine, that he'd fulfill his role as needed. He should have been able to repay his big brother who gave his life protecting him. Yet, as his eyes fell upon scorched earth, cooled stale air, and settled dust, he found his conviction shaken to its roots. However, while Sukuna was approaching him, someone else had arrived. Someone else who no one had expected to arrive and no one expected to be able to fight again. Aoi Todo had returned. As then we get a flashback back to Meimei and Todo talking. As then Meimei says, "I see, Mr. Todo. Using my crows and your technique, we can evacuate people from within Sukuna's domain. Being caught in this domain means instant death. I can't guarantee it'll save lives, but it's worth trying. Naturally, you'll be situated outside of the domain, so it'll require you extending the effective range of Boogie Woogie by quite a bit. You'll likely have over 4 targets to manage too. Do you think you and that arm of yours is really up to the task, Mr. Todo?" With Todo saying, "I can't be certain, but I can still feel its throbbing beat, the pulse of Boogie Woogie. We can't let brother know about this plan. You know why, don't you, Miss May?" As Meimei says, "Their residence, indeed." Itadori Yuji and Ryomen Sukuna were 2 souls inhabiting one body. Although severed, their connection runs thick. I hear the Yasuhachi Bridge mission was triggered by Itadori's swallowed finger resonating with one in the wild. You're suggesting that Itadori may unconsciously reveal the plan's details to Sukuna, correct? With Todo then saying that they're going to do the same with Yuta Akotsu's plan as well, basically not letting Yuji know about any of this. And I gotta say, the fact that Yuji and Yuta can fight so perfectly well together even though Yuji had no idea what Yuta's plan was at all, actually is kind of ridiculous. As then we get more text from the narrator saying his plan with Meimei, the time spent fine-tuning his technique alongside Akotsu Yuta, Todo himself being unable to verify the safety of his allies, the fact that he couldn't swap Itadori or Choso who were caught at the epicenter of Ryomen Sukuna's domain. There simply wasn't enough time to tell Itadori Yuji all of this. Why, you ask? before we then head back to Todo and Yuji, with Todo talking to Yuji, as Todo says, "I'm sorry, brother. However, everyone else is most likely fine," as that gave Yuji a spark of hope that he had to believe Todo because that was all he could do right now. When we go back to the narrator, with the narrator saying, "Because after using his domain, Realman Sukuna has entered a state in which it is painstakingly difficult to use his curse technique. Brotherly bonds linked on this path to victory." Now, I think this was easily one of the best chapters in this entire Shinjuku battle arc. If I'm not gonna lie, this might actually be my most favorite written chapter in the entire fight, and Choso now easily has the most impactful death for me out of literally every other character. That's mainly because we actually can see the brother journey between Choso and Yuji and how much it's been built up from the beginning, which I'm going to make an entirely different video centered around that, about Yuji and Choso's journey as brothers, and why this means so much, because this is easily one of the best deaths in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, at least for me. Now, I will be honest with you guys. At first, I really did not like the fact that Todo was back, mainly because of the fact that if Todo was around for this long, he would have been so useful with Boogie Woogie, because we all know how useful being able to swap people would actually be in this entire fight, especially considering Sukuna wouldn't be aware of the fact that Todo was even here. And there were just a lot of deaths that could have been prevented. For example, Higuruma's death could have been prevented if Todo was here, mainly because Todo could have likely used his Boogie Woogie in order to swap Sukuna with himself and make him get hit by the sword. But then I was thinking more and more, and I kind of realized, while this would be a possible strategy that could work, it's not a 100% guarantee. And because it's not a 100% guarantee and things could go badly, you basically waste your Boogie Woogie usage, which could end up going very, very poorly for everybody. So it would be better to use him at the absolute last possible moment where he was absolutely needed, rather than using Todo as a gamble while Sukuna still had most of his HP and was still mostly fine, instead of right now where Sukuna is at the worst possible state that he has been this entire fight. Also, this explains why we didn't see Ino and Miwa's simple domains break, because they already had been teleported out while Sukuna was making the fire arrow by Todo. And the soul resonance stuff also makes a lot of sense when you remember the fact that Sukuna could very clearly see and sense Megumi awakening his domain after he finished battling that finger bearer. So at least believing that Sukuna could potentially sense what's going on through Yuji does make a lot of sense, even though that's not really the case because he doesn't know how Yuji trained and what Yuji did over the last month. Also, this implies something else kind of funny that I recently just thought about. The fact that Todo calls Mei Mei Miss May, which means Mei Mei's name is literally just Mei Mei. She has the Mario logic of Mario. And I'm really excited for the next chapter too, because we're about to see some brotherly combos, and we're about to get a Yuji massive rage amp too, because he literally just watched his big brother die, so that is going to go absolutely crazy. And I'm very hyped up for the next chapter. Now, in my opinion, I think we're finally at the point where we're at the climax of this arc, but I could also be wrong about that, but I really want to see what's going to happen in the future, and I'm very, very hyped up for this. However, that's my opinion on this chapter, and I want to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below. Anyways, I'm gonna see y'all later. Peace out. Have a good day.